Welcome to the second part of the tutorial where we're going to take a look at the baking of the textures and the actual painting of the wood. I am starting in Maya again just to remind you what we need from the ground plane to bake. So I'm showing the UVs. We want the blue square to have the full UV set, and by now it only takes up half of it. So we're going to scale the UVs up by 100%. And with that, the center square is covering the entire region of where we have the tiled wood. Make sure you merge the vertices and then you can export this so we have a base we can paint and bake on. For baking this, I'm going to use XNormal, and we're going to import our low poly export we just made into our low definition meshes and the high poly tiling into our high definition meshes. And we're going to bake a normal map, an ambient occlusion map, a height map, and a cavity map onto a 1K map. If everything went right, this should be looking something like this. And there's already our normal map for the height map. We can adjust some of these values so that you find the lowest and the highest points. And I'd like to keep it very close to being white and very close to being black, but not the full pure white and black color. Once you've done that, you can bake out the remaining maps. Now that we have all maps baked out, we can start setting up our 3D code scene, and we're going to import the painted floor we've already exported before and go for a 1K map this time. Now all we have to do is import some of the textures already, so we can import the normal map and invert the green channel. And next we're going to import the ambient occlusion map that we have baked from XNormal. So we have a good base to start from in 3D code. If you press Ctrl P, you will get transported into Photoshop with the layers still in your document, and from here we're going to add some of the layers that we have already created. Before we do that, just a quick disclaimer that the layers we've created probably are not in the right orientation, so you have to fix the layers so that they overlap correctly with the layers baked out of XNormal. Also, as you can see here, sometimes it happens that they come with a border, and we do not want that. We will see this on the seam. So what we're going to do about this, we're going to take the document and change the canvas size and reduce it by 2 pixels. This way we get rid of the borders. Make sure you rasterize the layers and then crop the image to get rid of everything that has gone over the borders. And as you can see, the border is gone now. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to bring the image size back to 124, and we have our fixed seams that we can import into our original Photoshop document. Okay, I've already prepared the Photoshop document and imported all the maps we have already baked or rendered from ZBrush, and we're just going to start and fill these layers and work on the composition. So for the base color, we're just going to use a wood color that we would like to use. We can change this later, of course, but for now we're just going for a brown that we like. Something like this, for example. Then for the depth map out of ZBrush, we're going to turn this layer mode on multiply and probably go for an overlay of like 50%. And here I'm just ordering the ZBrush files, and here I'm taking the white map and turn this to multiply at around 50% again, so that we get some nice shadows in there. And for the cavities, the bake white cavity also from ZBrush, also put this on multiply to give a little more depth to the cavities we've created, all the cracks we've done. From our X normal, we're going to take the height map, and I forgot to turn this, so I'm doing this now. And for this one, I'm going to overlay it to get some color differences in there and put this on a very low number, but you can still see the color differences in the planks, which is nice, and we don't have to do it by hand. And then some more cavities that we've baked, putting it on multiply. With the standard material that we baked out, we have to desaturate the red color, of course, so that we can use it on a wooden map. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to overlay this material at about a 50% opacity. All these values we can change later because it's all on layers, which is very nice and gives us a lot of control. And the plastic look we're also going to put on overlay, but on a lower number. Now I'm just doing some fine tuning. I like this texture to be a little bit darker, I think. Something like this, and this already looks a lot like a wood texture that we can already use if we wanted to. If we save this and open 3D Code again, we should have all the layers we've made in Photoshop in here as well, and I'll be adding a few more here to paint on. So the first one I'm doing is the edge layer, which we're going to put on overlay, and we're going to use a very bright color, and I'm choosing a very bright yellow, almost white. Put this to overlay, and I'm going to start painting the edge detail. And as you can see, it's tiling, so I don't have to worry about the seams when I paint here in 3D Code, because we imported the very large painting square. To know where I'm painting my edge detail, I am imagining a light source from the top left, so I'm going to be painting all the edges that are close to the top of the planks and also next to the cracks that we have sculpted in and are now visible thanks to our renders we have gotten from ZBrush. So I'm going to emulate lighting information on my texture. And later I'm going to be tweaking the intensity of the light source, as you can see here, to about 50%, so that the effect isn't that strong but still visible. And I'm going to repeat this process for the remaining planks that we have created. And I'm going to speed this up for you. Now we're going to create a new layer for the metal bolts, and for this one we're going to use one of the smart materials that are in 3D Code, and we're going into the Metals tab and click on the metal forged one to see how that one's going to look. If you click it for the first time, it's going to calculate your curvature map if you don't have one already. And once that is done, we can start with the painting. And with this preview window, I can have a look how my material is going to look like and to see how the bolts are going to look like. And I think I'm going to switch to the metal rusty material. And paint this one onto our bolts just by hand and filling these out. Here I'm just using a quicker method. It's figuring out the marquee selection and just filling these by dragging circles over these, and I'm going to repeat this for all of the bolts. Once I'm done with that, I'm having a look at the glossiness of the metal pieces, and I've decided to turn this down a little bit so that the effect isn't so strong, especially because the rest of the wood does not have any gloss at the moment. Now we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to use one of the dirt materials to fill in the cavities a bit with dirt that is laying down, especially in the cracks and at the edges of the wood. And I'm just going to paint this in where I want to have it. And I'm using a little bit of a softer brush, and I'm going to remove the glossiness from our brush stroke here. And I'm just going to paint this in manually wherever I want it, which is basically in between the wooden planks. And we're going to use this to get some color variation in there and use a little bit of a different color for the dirt. Once I'm happy, I'm going to hit Ctrl P again to go back into Photoshop and update my temporary layer file. And in here, I'm going to do some tweaking to the textures. Just having a look what we can do. And I'm going to pick out the dirt that we just created. And I'm going to change the color and make it a little bit green, so that in this way we're going to introduce another color to the texture. And you can see you can play around with this, you can make it white, you can add maybe some paint this way. You have a lot of control over your textures here. Okay, I'm quite happy with this color, and now I'm going to go back into 3D Code, where we'll be dealing a little bit with light and shadow now. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I want to get rid of the very pure black color that is between these wooden planks, because that gives us a lot of contrast, and I would like to reduce this a little bit. So I'm going to take a dark brown and I'm going to fill the layer with a color. I'm going to do this for all of the major cracks and all the cracks that are in between the planks. Then I'm going to clean up some of the layer structure here. I want the dirt to be under the cavities to be a bit more visible, so I'm bringing this up so the green color is going to be more prominent on a higher layer then. And also it covers a lot of the light and shadow information because it's on top of the other pieces. But I'm putting it below the shadow layer we just created because it's also affected by the shadow, and I'm just lowering the opacity of the cavity. Now I'm creating another layer which I'm going to call light, and this one I'm using to paint in some more light information to make the texture pop out just a little bit more. Setting this one to overlay, just like the edge layer we've created, and I'm going to use a pure white color, and I'm going to highlight the edges that we have sculpted on top of the planks. So all the pieces that catch the light, just like the edges, are going to be getting another light layer here. And for me, this was lagging, so I'm going to Photoshop and do it in there. Once I'm done, I'm lowering the opacity to about 50%, and I'm going back to 3D Code to do the final few steps of painting. In here, I'm going to create a new layer, and call it color differences to paint some more color information onto the planks. And for this, I'm going again for an overlay layer, and I'm going to paint a darker color. About 35% of gray. And with this, I'm just drawing some lines to just add some more color information to the planks. And this concludes the painting of the textures. Now we can export our textures from 3D Code. So I'm going to export our color map. The metalness map for the bolts that we have created, and the roughness map. Okay, now I already have set up a marmoset scene with the normal map on top of our square that we have painted, and I'm going to import the other textures by putting reflectivity to metalness, and also importing the color map that we've just exported from 3D Code. And then I'm going to import the roughness map and invert it so that it's not using a gloss map but the roughness map. I've also put in a directional light in here so we can see a little bit better how the roughness is reacting to a light source. And now we're going to tweak the roughness map a little bit and add some more detail to it. And this we're going to do in Photoshop by using the layers we have from our 3D Code scene and importing the roughness texture as a base. I am tweaking the color of the bolts here and make them black, because anything that is black is very smooth and therefore will reflect a lot more light, and anything that is white is a very rough surface and will break the light a lot more and make the reflection a lot smoother. On top of this, I'm putting a desaturation layer, so all the colors we have made are now in grayscale, which is easier to work with to understand the roughness texture a lot more. Okay, I'm starting by putting this layer at the very bottom and work my way up from there with all the other textures that we have made so far. And tweaking their value. So I'm starting by the color detail that we have made in 3D Code. And I am going to bring this back to normal to make this visible, and then I'm just going to tweak the colors here, and I'm making this a little bit brighter but not pure white, so that we see the detail in the roughness map a little bit. Turning this one to multiply because we have only black and white, so this will shine through. And I'm making the base very white. Okay, then I'm going to work my way through the rest of the layers and tweaking their opacities mainly, so that we have some more color information, black and white information in the roughness map. I'm just being very subtle, and sometimes this time I inverted the layer so that the cavities stay non-reflective and non-glossy. I'm just seeing what works here. First time is probably not going to be right, but you get the idea. So most of the layers that were made to give me cracks and cavities, I'm going to invert these, put them back to normal, and I'm trying to get the glossiness out of these pieces. Same with ambient occlusion. And dirt. I think I decided to start with having a very glossy dirt, but I will change this a little bit later. So again, the shadows and the cavities, I'll put them onto a very light color. You can keep the height differences in there to have some color variation and some roughness variation in the texture if you like. And I'm going to save this, but it's going to be too glossy. And as you can see, it's a little bit too extreme for my taste, so we're going to have to go back into Photoshop and make this effect a little bit more subtle and probably make some of the parts that are a bit too glossy right now a bit more lighter in Photoshop. So as you can see here, I've taken away some of the darker layers and overall lightened the color up quite a bit to fix the very glossy appearance of the texture we had. And you just need to see what layers are very dark and maybe remove them and to keep it quite subtle. And here I'm deciding to even take away some of the cavity information. And as you can see, it's a lot more subtle now and works a lot better. I will leave the final tweaking to you to tweak this texture to your own likings. You have all the layers available for yourself to tweak the color, tweak the details, tweak the amount of dirt, and tweak their roughness if you choose so. Otherwise, this texture is also usable for a diffuse only workflow, but I've added the PBR to show you what's possible with the maps we've already created and the layers we've created, that we have a lot of control over the texture. If it's stylized or stylized PBR or purely hand painted, there's a lot we can do with the texture. And I hope you like this tutorial. Let me know what you think and feel free to show me your final wooden texture results. I hope I see you next time. Thank you very much and bye.